So we are going to get started with our first panel. Mental health is evolving beyond just coping. It's about thriving and the ownership of well-being. As awareness grows, new approaches are reshaping how we care for ourselves and our communities. And I know we can all agree that we need these tools now more than ever. Our experts will share insights on the shifting landscape of mental health and what it means for the future. Because main character energy means prioritizing yourself and leading the way to a healthier, more empowered life. So let's give it up for mental health and living in our main character energy. So to kick us off today in the North Light Court, we are going to be asking Yeri Sean to come up as our moderator. Yeri Sean is the Associate Director at the Korean Community Center of the East Bay, or KCCEB, where she focuses on program integration and community impact. Previously, she was Chief of Program Integration at KCCEB and a research consultant at Human Impact Partners, conducting policy and health impact research. Please give a round of applause for Yeri as she kicks us off.
Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us. Wow, look at this crowd, it's amazing. I can't share how honored I feel to be moderator for this panel. We have amazing panelists here today. And before we start, I just want to share a little bit, sorry not to bore you with data, but to share a couple data points before I bring the panelists up, because it just wants to set the tone why mental health and why now and why our community. So we have some data here. In the last 10 years, more than half of California's arriving immigrants came from Asia, including over 16,000 folks from Southeast Asia. So just think about that. California is immigrants, and we are California. So thinking and starting with that in the mindset. 1 in 5 Asian Americans reported being subject to hate incidents, and most often being questioned about their place of origin. So this kind of breaking this feeling of belonging and then really emphasizing feeling othered. Suicide is the leading cause of death among Asian Americans aged 15 to 24, and second leading cause for Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. And it really connects to the impact of being displaced, the immigration stress, and also acculturation, and even for generations that were born in the United States. And today, later, we're gonna actually talk about intergenerational trauma. It'll be in this space about an hour later, so please come back if you're interested. And lastly, I just wanna say how our communities are least likely to get help. We basically get the least number of services or percentage of mental health services compared to any other ethnic group or racial group. And that's about a third of the rate that our white counterparts get the services. And this all adds because we don't have a lot of bicultural, bilingual workforce. So about only, I would say, 8% of psychiatrists in California speak Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Tagalog, Korean combined. So when you think about diversity of our California, we can see how our access to mental health is really difficult. So all to say, it's not to bring the mood down, but I just want to say why mental health is so important and crucial to talk about this now. And we have amazing panelists who are actually leading this field with innovation and boldness. So I'm going to call them up. Sorry, thank you for holding on, So I'll first introduce Angela Tate, CEO of RAMS. Please welcome her with applause. Thank you. Woo! And next is Carrie Zhang, who is founder of Asia Mental Health Project. Please join me in welcoming her upstairs. All right. So I want to get them a little settled. So I really thought about drafting a bio and reading it, but I really don't think it could capture the depth of the careers and the amazing work that they've been doing, the accomplishments they've had. And since this space is really about connecting with each other and igniting this main character energy, I'm going to actually ask them to do the self-intro. Little birded off at my back. But also in that intro to share kind of personal story of what really brought them into this field. So it could be personal journey, story, or what maybe kind of ignited that passion. So I will pick on Carrie because we made an eye contact.
Oh no, not the eye contact. Hello, my name is Carrie. Oh, sorry, am I too loud? How we doing sound-wise? We okay? We good? Many thumbs up, just the validation I needed. Anyway, I'm Carrie. I'm the founder of Asian Mental Health Project. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a daughter of Taiwanese and Chinese immigrants, and I'm just really grateful to be in this space today. Shall I introduce anything? Okay, cool. Asian Mental Health Project was technically founded in 2019-ish as sort of a project for myself. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm just someone with lived experiences and an organizer. And so it started as sort of a digital like Instagram storytelling project on people's mental health experiences. And then when COVID hit, there was a high rate of anti-Asian hate crimes and a lot of like social activation with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and things like that. So we really felt a need to activate and create these sort of wellness groups that have prevailed to this day. And so now we offer community-based resources, affinity groups, a mental health assistance grant, as well as, I am missing something, just like multimedia resources and things like that. And I'm really grateful to be here today. I'll pass it off to Angela.
Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Tang. It's so wonderful to be here and to see everyone's faces. And it's really heartening to be together in community. So thank you so much for coming. I'm Angela. I'm part of RAMS. It's Richmond Area Multi-Services. We're a nonprofit mental health agency in San Francisco and also in Alameda County. We've been around. We're 50 years strong, celebrating 50 years last year. We just a bit about RAMS. We serve the entire lifespan, so 0 all the way. We're in preschools, high schools, outpatient. We have a vocational training program. We have residential, and we're really prioritizing those with the least amount of resources. So we're serving those who are uninsured, Medi-Cal, and so forth. And we also are able to provide services in over 30 languages. We're really rooted, the Richmond is because we started in the Richmond district, but over 50 years, we're across the city in Alameda. Founded, like many organizations, a grassroots effort around many innovative leaders at who are still with us around seeing the need and really doing something about it. And so I think that's the resiliency, that's the legacy of so many of our communities. And I think one of the questions was what kind of led us to the field. So, introducing myself again is I am born and raised in San Francisco. I am a daughter of immigrants. Part of my journey in coming, kind of being part of the field was, though I grew up in San Francisco, I experienced a lot of explicit and implicit racism, and I could see, growing up, how that really impacted me. And then also when I went to high school, which had many Asian Americans, that's where I felt, and I met my wonderful group of friends that we're still very, very close together, and we're really in community. And I think that's where that sense of belonging really, I saw that pivotal point, and I think that's what really sparked why I wanted to be in the field. So, growing up, we didn't talk about mental health that much. I didn't really know about mental health careers. I started off, in college as a business major, and so I think, but through that path, I'm like, oh, I feel like there's something else. I feel like there is a calling that I want to do. And then one of my friends at the time was like, well, why don't you volunteer at Asian Women's Shelter? So I was there for many years, and that's where it really kind of kicked off. I changed my major to social work, went on to grad school, and then when I graduated, I started at RAMS. And 20 years down the line, I feel very humbled to be part of an organization that is doing a lot of community work in partnership with so many around us. So.
Thank you. And Carrie, I was wondering if you wanted to add anything about your personal journey into this field.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry. I skipped over that part. That was so beautiful. Okay, my personal journey. So I started this straight out of college. And to be really super honest, in college, I experienced sexual violence. And I didn't quite know it at the time. And then I was essentially placed into school, like psychiatric care. And then so I went from having zero knowledge about anything going in about my mental health to being placed into a program where I did psychiatric evaluations, one-on-one therapy, and then group therapy. So I went from 0 to 100 real quick. I was like, oh, hello. But after processing that, well, I thought, I was like, this is great. I'm just going to process this one piece of acute trauma. What I had noticed is that a lot of the symptoms that I was feeling of PTSD, anxiety, depression, were things that I had learned throughout my life, or the conditions that I had developed because of my cultural upbringing, or stigma around that, I should say, and different expectations in my heritage, and just navigating this sort of weird dichotomy of identity as well, and things like that. So after college, you're kind of like stripped of health insurance and you're like, what do I do? And so I think I was in a very lost place, looking for resources for folks for Asian women like me, or survivors, or queer people, and things like that. And I couldn't find anything on the internet. I remember specifically Googling, this was back in like 2015, I was like Googling like youth Asian mental health resources at my old high school. They've since improved a lot, but I found like nothing since they hadn't been updated since 2004. And I was just really angry. I was like, these folks around me, people that I know who have had a similar upbringing, are really struggling, and there isn't anything out there. So again, I'm not a mental health professional. Again, with lived experience, I have a background in public relations and communications, and so I wanted to utilize that background to be able to synthesize information. So I was like, if I can understand it in my public eye, then maybe somebody else could too. And so it started, as things do, on the gram as an Instagram project, and then it grew as mentioned before. So. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you both for sharing such a personal story, actually, and being open to being vulnerable as you share with our audience. And I'm just amazed about how it really started with that personal experience for both of you, and leading that to your career, and then also leading that to improve the lives for other people, other folks in the community. So thank you for that. The first question that we have today is, as we all know here, our theme is shifting landscape of mental health. So what are some new trends or shifts that you see around mental health that's really important for Asian communities to take notice of or to be reminded of?
I'll start.
Popcorn style.
I think today is also a really big monumental, like these things around that we're talking about it in different spaces. So I think that we're talking about mental health in a more like mainstream kind of way, a more public way, that we're talking about whole health. It is including mental health, your mind, body, and spirit. And I think that is like the big headline that I feel in the past several years. I think that, COVID had many things that went wrong, and it also shined a light about mental health and our own mental health needs. It catapulted us to really talk about it and be more at the forefront, and that we don't have to be everything to everybody all the time. That there are shifts, and there are also ways to like connect with other people. I also think there is a more of a discussion about what healing could look like. It doesn't, that mental health services doesn't always look like two people in a room. It can, but there's also other ways that we can talk about mental health, that we could talk about our own wellness, and how do we kind of maintain, ourselves and those around us.
Yeah, I love that so much. I love the new pathways to healing and like holistic wellness, mind, body, spirit, that sort of alignment. It definitely resonates with that. In terms of health, trends that we've noticed, even in the last like 5 to 6 years, I think it's particularly accelerated because COVID, I think, revealed the house of cards that we live in, and then the real need for actual infrastructure. So what I'm seeing these days is more mental health infrastructure being built that is more culturally responsive, which I think is so great. I want to shout out Yellow Chair Collective. They're one of the leaders who shout out, hey! And providers such as Yellow Chair Collective provide culturally responsive care, really bridging that gap between this clinical, very Western, predominantly white field. How do we make it so that it is attuned to the cultural experiences of folks of Asian diasporas and different cultures as well? So I've been noticing a roar of that. With digital access, I think that has been able to increase access to care, with telehealth, but also with visibility of certain issues. But I also think there's a lot of gaps. I think sometimes, our policies really fall short in terms of supporting these grassroots organizations, in terms of supporting individuals going through crisis. It's still very carceral of a process, but again, similar to the House of Cards, I think there's more access and ability to see what's really going on to be able to create that. Create that larger movement that will, I think. It sounds like we're trending in an upwards direction of providing more care that's truly accessible for folks, but there's still a lot of work to do.
Thank you both, and that's a perfect segue into our next question, because you mentioned how it's not like Western styles model of services, and how there should be more spotlight towards more culturally responsive type approach to the work, because the mainstream mental health services in this country has been that Western model, which is the one-on-one counseling, and that's very important support. That's actually really necessary services. However, mental health approach is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's something that could be seen in so many different spaces, so many different ways, especially in our communities where there has been also traditional healing practices. There's also culturally driven approaches that may not really fit into that mainstream model. So the next question I have is, what are some community mental health practices that you've seen in your work that has been effective? Yeah.
I think it's still like the cultural healing practices that we can have, and that what does in community mean. So I'll say, I think historically there's been, when we talk about like mental health treatment, it's like when I say two people in a room, it's like the therapist and the person, and that is very meaningful for many. And there's other ways in which we can practice wellness. So I talked about how one of the kind of the levers, or kind of how I shifted to this work, is I found my community, and I felt a sense of belonging when I started high school. And I think those are like the ways in which we can still have that really help a person. So what are ways in which organizations can build community? It could be like wellness centers, it could be activity groups, it could be like integration of the arts in all sorts of ways. We can heal through like music therapy, or there's different things that our community does that it doesn't, and the way we communicate sometimes can be implicit and explicit, and I think those are the ways that we can all shift. One of the things that also at RAMS that we have more and more of is peer counseling. So those with like lived experience really sharing their story, and also using that as a way to connect with others. So I think that's different kinds of providers and people, different types of counseling and different types of providers that can work with someone, because we are kind of one person in this entire environment.
Yeah, I love that. I love what you're talking about peer as well. I think peer-to-peer support is really important, especially with community care and allowing different types of providers. I always like to say different modalities of mental health care are tools, not full solutions, and the solution is to invest in that greater community care there. So it can be anything. Community care can be like
showing up for your friend after they're having a really hard time, and helping them, I don't know, clean their house or something like that. But it can also be, wellness centers that are open to everybody, open to the public, where people can gather. I think the human needs of gathering, human needs of connection, and of self-reflection, I think can all. What is going? I'm sorry, I keep hitting this microphone. Are all really key components and ways to nurture that, whether it is through like clinical resources or through in your day to day. I think that would be really helpful. One thing I think would be really important is if in our education systems we embed in what is mental health first aid, mental health safety, and those sorts of things made accessible and available to folks at a young age, being able to talk about it across generations to really create this network of support, I think is a key component of community care.
So my background is in public health, and this is exactly about that. Starting with the prevention, right? We're not just waiting for folks to be sick and then seeking treatment, but if we could start early on from the community, from individual relationships, and building that, it's almost like building that safety net and support for each other. And I think that really leads to community resilience. So thank you for sharing that. And I think like what you just shared, also thinking, just reflecting our practices too at our organization, it really is about talking and really meeting the community at that eye level, right? Just meeting them where they're at. I remember reading about how there were practitioners, mental health practitioners working with refugees from Africa, and then their feedback was like, you guys are always asking us to talk about our pain, but we want to talk about our joy. And it's a very different cultural lens and cultural perspective. So I think really understanding that as we approach and meet with the community, and centering that, I think will be really crucial. The next question, I think you also kind of mentioned it too, because we're thinking about going into the future. So in the past, one of the restrictions to really seeking mental health was stigma in our respective communities, along with shame. So what has really shifted since then? What are some still rooms that we have for improvement? And where would you like to see changes going in the future?
Yeah, I think, big question.
You could take a piece at a time.
Yes. The first part of the question was stigma. How has it changed? I think I personally believe that stigma has seen a lot of improvement lately because of access and things, but that doesn't mean it has completely been eradicated at all. Stigma doesn't necessarily have to be like, I know the terms. I think the increased vocabulary has been really important to be able to name the feelings, name the experiences. But I do think, there's a lot of parts of mental health that are still highly stigmatized. And it has to do with our overall social ecosystem and things of, particularly folks who are of different economic classes and things. The stigma looks different for, everybody depending on, their life circumstances. So I think there's still a long way to go, but in terms of breaking stigma, I think there's a lot of work being done on that front. This, for example, is so awesome to see everybody come out. This is so cool to talk about trends in mental health. I don't feel, shout out to all of y'all, woohoo! But I feel like this type of conversation didn't exist several years ago. Even when I, started as a child, not a child, no, oh my God, as a college student several years ago, I didn't have the vocabulary, and now I do, and I think that is a testament to how stigma has shifted, but also, throughout childhood as well. And I think when we were talking to youth in some of our workshops, I asked folks to raise their hands if they've heard about mental health, and every child raised their hand, and I think that's amazing, because I don't think that was the case when I was growing up. But there is still a very long way to go. Stigma is kind of the overarching piece. It's still highly stigmatized to get help, to seek help, and for it to be available. But I think there is a lot of work being done from mental health organizers of meeting people where they're at to pull them out of that stigma and shame and things. And that's all I have.
I like what you said about the vocabulary piece of it. I think that historically we've kind of talked about mental health as it may mean that mental health can actually start at prevention. It's not just this crisis mode that happens. It's not all of a sudden you kind of think about mental health when something bad is happening, that it's actually all throughout all throughout, and we should take care of it. It's like cardiac health. There's other prevention stuff, the diet, exercise, and all that. We also need to think of ourselves. I kind of was saying, like, our person in our environment. So what are the things that are kind of the stressors, or how do we kind of take a pulse check on ourselves around that? And so having the vocabulary to name it, I think, is very powerful. It's like you have this gut feeling that something's not right, but then if somebody can like reflect that, or there's more like talk about it that you see in the media or books, or even your friends kind of sharing about it, you're like, you have that aha moment, like, yes, like once you kind of like, oh, that is it, then you can kind of, and sometimes it can feel like you're halfway there, because you can kind of like, it's more palatable. So I think vocabulary is very empowering. And what you were saying about like even, or what we've been talking about even at like school age, like really just embedding it into our lens of the day-to-day, that it's not like a separate class or something. Maybe it can be, but also how do we integrate it and talk about it? If, because it's inevitable, like two kids on the playground are gonna have conflict, like, but how do we help them and support them so that they can talk about it and work it out? And I think those are like the foundations of like coping, finding resilience, strength.
Yeah. And then to tag along with that too, I think also the vocabulary and language. A lot of us come from homes and generations that, there's English is not the primary language spoken in home, and policy affects this too. I know there's an executive order out there making English the primary language. With all that being said, it affects the access to multilingual, monolingual resources that are not English, and I think that's another place where we have to go to extend meeting folks where they're at language-wise as well.
It's, I think, really what our panelists are talking about is shifting our norm, where the norm is talking about mental health. We're thinking about it not as a second thought, but as just a big part of our health, our own health, and being well. Just really, I think that's the message I'm getting. Because I want to give time for our audience Q&A, I'm going to skip to our last question. And I cannot not mention what's happening in our present day. So we are facing some extreme and unprecedented attacks to our communities, our diverse communities. And more than ever, our community will need to really stand strong. And as Asian women, all the way from our ancestors to our mothers and our sisters here, we've been always incredibly resilient in time of hardships. So just giving yourself, pat in the back. But at the same time, we do really need to take care of ourselves to stay resilient and strong. So with all of that said, what do you do for self-care in these difficult times?
I'll go back to like I'll just say my own village. I have an amazing, I work with an amazing group of people who I really feel like we are kind of in it together. And I think that, all through all the ups and downs of things that are happening around us, around policy and things like that, I feel like we're kind of really all have kind of eyes on the mission and vision of our organization. I also want to say, like, personally, I have, I kind of talked about my sense of belonging and kind of my friend group, my family group. They listen to me kind of through all the ups and downs. And I think I feel very supported through that. So I'll say that. And then also I kind of just do my own pulse check. There's so much news and so much stuff going out there. Yes, I want to stay involved and be aware, and I also need to know, like, when I'm, every once in a while, at least once a day, I'm like, okay, so how am I doing today? And maybe I need to like pull back on something else, or maybe I am not feeling like so empowered today. So what can I do? So I've been listening to different videos and articles or like podcasts on like stories of resilience when times were also really tough, and how did people kind of persist and move forward. So that's how I am inspired. So like even I'm sorry. So even seeing like those posters that go around, like I felt like I started the morning like very uplifted, and being with you all. So.
I love that so much. Yes to all of that. I'll say a couple things I've been working on are focused self-care time, because usually when I'm like doing like self-care in the past, I'm like kind of trying to multitask or like bake it into something else. No. I'm trying to do some me time and going back into things that bring me joy. I'm letting myself be happy. Whoa, that's cool. And one thing I do is I try to watch the sunset. Shout out to my west-facing balcony at home. But no, it's something that has been really helpful to me, because it's like no matter how stressful the day is, I can always look to the sun and it's always going to set, and it kind of just helps ground me into something that's bigger than myself, and that's been very calming. So my dog and I will sit out and we'll watch the sunset. Yeah,
I was just picturing that. It is beautiful. And Angela, I think what you said earlier, it kind of hit me, was about when you talked about COVID, can't be everything to everybody all the time. And I think there are times where we really have to show up for ourselves and just really look into ourselves and like, what do I need from myself? And whether it's time with the dog, watching the sunset, right? But kind of like stepping back, I'm like, okay, I'm not feeling quite at 100%. What do I need to do to take care of myself? I think we really need all of that. And that's going to be really important going into the future, actually, next few years. I think we'll definitely need that. I do want to open it up for our audience Q&A. Yeah. And we have...
Embrace your main character energy and ask our lovely panelists a question today.
I'm Ronald. Angela, I was a therapist at Rams from 94 to 98, which means I'm old, but before you. So about trends, this is actually about something that's ongoing, the balancing so I want to say something very assertive, which is beware of universalists. Beware of the therapists that won't talk to you about being Asian, won't talk to you about race, who minimizes or is afraid because they're uncomfortable about race, about gender, about sexuality, about immigration, about all those things. That's part of that universalism. And what it does is that in of itself is a form of microaggression, because it minimizes or dismisses your part of your essence. So my recommendation to everybody is, along with everything, one of the battles that we have is that trend against DEI now, which used to be civil rights, social justice, and so forth, is that if you are working with a therapist, Asian, white, or whatever else, who is unable to talk about those things, find a new therapist.
Can I say no? Thank you so much for like really underscoring that. We kind of talked about our journeys, about how we came into the field, and in so much of that is tied into our identities, and that we have multiple layers of our identities and that intersection. So being able to be very specific about it. How does being, an Asian American, or for me, like a Chinese American individual, and also in the context of my family, and how does that really shape how I kind of be in this world? So thank you so much for saying that.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your stories. Essentially, I'm a tech manager, and during COVID, even though I'm not a health worker whatsoever, but because I do have Asian, workers under me, I do feel that oftentimes, even as a manager, I have to play the role of ensuring mental wellness. So for all of you guys who are managers to Asian people, can you provide some advice as to folks like us that wants to do good by the people that work for us, but we don't have that wellness background? What tips or what strategies we can also use to give them the benefit of that wellness that they may not be able to seek because they haven't been here and realized there's all these resources here? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that on. Yeah, I think that's so important. Shout out to managers who care about your well-being. Thank y'all who are managers who do that. That's amazing. I think two things. Firstly, set boundaries, a container for yourself. How much are you willing to extend? How much can you extend? What's within your purview, and setting those boundaries there. Two, I would assess needs. So going to your team or folks and just even if it's like a survey or however it is, like creating a safe, contained space for people to be able to anonymously submit what they would need in a workspace. How can a workspace and a manager support you? And be very specific about that kind of role, because that's the role you play in their lives. There's no need to like overextend. But there is, it feels, it's really important when I think a workplace cares about your well-being. So I think those two assessments are important, and then marrying those two boundaries and assessments of needs together to see if you can create spaces that attune to folks. But on just sort of like a micro day-to-day level, asking people how they're doing, like really, even if it's just like one question. I do like stand-up calls and things with folks who I work with or I work under and stuff, and it's always really helpful when they're like, hey, like checking, like, how are you really doing? What's your bandwidth like? Incorporating those questions in, and then doing the work of supporting folks there and asking for support when you need, I think can create a system of wellness in your workplace.
No, well said. And the only like maybe thing I might add is if your workplace may have like employee resource groups or other type of affinity groups, or even if you don't have one, you could just more casually, informally talk to somebody else. It's that community, fostering community that I think is like the foundation of wellness for many. So I think there's a lot of, if you're experiencing something, there's likelihood that somebody else is too. Yeah.
My question builds off of nurturing the ecosystem of wellness, and what you were saying about coming home to your village and the support of your village. I'm curious what the different like flavors of those bonds can look like for you, and ways that may go beyond the conventional, therapist-patient model in a room. For example, for me, like friendships, especially strong female friendships, have been really helpful, but ones in which it's like, okay, how do we show up with mutual like consciousness and holding that space, but when one person's triggered, how do we like reach out to restore connection? And learning those skills, it's like this dance of doing the inner work with your own parts and your own baggage, but then practicing and creating that culture through our friendships. So for me, like friendships has been one example of that. So I'm curious for y'all, when you're thinking of your village and what that really looks like beyond professional, personal, right? Those usual boxes. What are those bonds? How do you keep them healthy, strong? What has been supportive for you in really creating that psychological safety, or the mind, body, soul safety in all your bonds?
That's an amazing question, by the way. We're just processing it a little bit.
So no, I'm trying to think like I think for me, I feel like I have been able to kind of figure out and make connections through different types of friendships, whether and different ways I've met them. So maybe it's like my workplace, and then my longtime friends, and then parents of other. So I have two elementary school kids. So having I've made friendships with like some of the parents of my children's of kids, and then also my family members too. So my husband has been like a champion also. So I don't know if that kind of is speaking to it.
Yeah. I could also add just briefly. For me, work is a huge piece. I work in a nonprofit where so many folks have similar passion, and we're all facing kind of challenges right now. And in a way, in a really interesting way, even that as we support each other, it becomes compartmentalized in a way. So I have a colleague, we're like the water cooler. We're just like venting, right? Like that's our Zoom meeting all the way. And then we have I have a colleague who's also like, we sit down and talk about like philosophical things. Like that's just kind of our jam. So I think also also finding different folks who you have the different vibe with is always helpful too, because you can't always be grieving. Because we're just complex emotions, right? We're not always grieving. We're not always angry. We're not always processing, and we need different partners, I think, to do that. And sorry, I wanted to make
No,
sure.
I love that so much. My friend Phil, one time he was like, "Do you need my heart, my eyes, or my mind?" And I was like, "That is gold." Shout out to Phil Wang. But I take that to a lot of the relationships that I have, whether it's with friends. Chosen family. A lot of times I find community in people who have a shared identity with me, whether it's a coworker is a shared identity in workspace kind of things. But I'm queer and bisexual, so queer Asian community has been really important to me in unpacking ways that I cannot unpack with other people. And also just sort of learning how to create safe spaces in myself so that I can reflect it to the people that I care about as well. What does it mean to actively listen? What does it mean to hold space? And what does it mean to either lend your head, heart, what did I say? I don't remember. Eyes, ears, heart, hokey pokey, I don't know. Shout out to, I'll have to clarify with my buddy there. But yeah, just being clear about my needs and my capacity to hold other folks' needs and going to them in that, I think is a crucial part of community care. And then affinity groups, Asian Mental Health Project, we do offer affinity identity-based groups, and the identities can be, being an Asian woman and femme, or it could be someone who's a caretaker. So going along with those sorts of things and setting the boundaries around there, I think is really helpful.
Sorry. So I'll add one more thing is that I think it's also like me figuring out when I'm wanting to kind of talk to someone, also knowing like what kind of support am I needing. So I'm like, I may start off with like, I don't need to problem solve. Just hear me, and that's it. And so I think it took me a while to kind of figure that out in myself, like who and it's okay. Like you don't have to go to support for the same person. Is kind of what you were saying about like you have different needs and you go to different people for different things, and that's okay because it does take a village, right? So then sometimes I'm going to someone, I'm like, I just need to just listen. and then if we want to problem solve, then that'll be like chapter 2. So.
And we'll have our last question over here.
Thank you. I saw that later on there's going to be a Tiger Mom session. So this is a Tiger Mom question. A Tiger working mom. I just feel like at the moment, with the digital age, and also here in kind of like mixed culture families, the role of the Tiger working mom is just quite chaotic, if I can speak for myself. So I just wonder, are there any trends or coping mechanisms that you have helped clients and etc. If you can share some words of wisdom. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I repeat to myself, I cannot be everything to everyone all at once. Like, really. I cannot be everything to everyone all at once. I have to I'm literally doing it now too. So I think we have these high expectations of ourselves, and also generationally, it's just every generation is really, there's this pressure to take it up to the next level. And it's an impossible goal. And so I think we have to give ourselves more grace. To know that sometimes we will be 80% here, and sometimes we'll have to be 20% there, and sometimes we'll be able to do a little bit more here, and sometimes we're not. We don't have to do all the school things that we for the school committees. We don't have to because ultimately I feel like our kids want to see us also be happy, and we are that model too. So. That's kind of the things that actually cycle through my thought process is that yes, we're helping our kids succeed, and at the same time, the way to help them succeed is to also kind of model and kind of have that. I hesitate to use the word balance, but it is a balance at some ways. But sometimes there's a little bit of off balance, and then that's where we kind of also have to recognize that too. I don't know if that helps.
We actually have one more question in the middle.
Can Can you hear it? Okay. So, as someone who is a graduating sociology major, and I'm currently working on like a research project for like Asian mental health, but I was wondering, what advice do you have when I like continue my research on Asian mental health, but also in specific, more like when doing like intergenerational like research?
I can take that. I think with the limited research experience, like collegiate research that I have, I think it's don't be afraid to, if you have a question about something, I think oftentimes we're told to kind of dismiss it, like this is just the way of the world, like Asian folks react this way just because that's how we are. And that's sort of a systemically programmed kind of thing. So I would say like any questions that you have about, this doesn't necessarily match this, write that down as a question and explore it, because there's such a big hunger for data now that there wasn't before, and there's so few research papers out there. When we're developing resources, we're kind of citing like a lot of the similar few things that have been really lovely cornerstone resources to us. But I think more questions need to be asked about the intersection of Asian Americans' identity and mental health and things like that. So continue to probe at those questions, because we really need to understand like the intricacies of that, and then also the notion of disaggregating data, understanding the other intersectional identities that may come through your research. I think that would be really important to know, because when we look at the other day we were looking at specific resources for Asian trans women survivors and things like that, trying to build resources off of that. It was very limited data that we could find that we really, really desperately need. And so finding the intricacies of that data would be really important.
Thank you. I want to also do a plug for the next panel that's around intergenerational healing. So I think that would be a really great kind of part to highlight in thinking about your research. I also think that when we're talking about like Asian American mental health, to also know that we all have our different cultural experiences. So the East Asian experience is different than the Southeast Asian experience and South Asian experience. So we have many. Being Asian is not a monolithic, where we all have all different experiences, and so maybe there could be like a question around questions around that, or kind of knowing that there are many subgroups within our community.
Can we give everybody a huge round of applause? Gary, did you want to say